This is SimNews.TV, and you're listening to the Super League show. Hello, everybody. Once again, we have got so much to talk about with the GPVWC Super League on the Super League show. Jake Sanson here, and my goodness me, we've only just recovered from an amazing round 3 to talk through everything we possibly can and to squeeze it as close to 40 minutes or so as we possibly can. Here with me, once again, Ben Willis and Kacper. Hello, boys.
Hello.
Hey, everyone.
Right, so we've got to start at the basics, I suppose. There are a few upgrades to talk about going into the weekend, Ben, and we kind of had an idea going in. We thought we kind of had an idea going in who was going to be where, sort of.
Yeah, sort of, I think is the best way we could put it. We had upgrades from Storm, Mad Cape, and Engine Supply Valiant. Storm bolted on some front and rear wing downforce upgrades, and theoretically they had the best car on the grid in terms of chassis and upgrades. Mad Cape rocks up finally with some upgrades on race 3, but it was tiny. It was a 12-point upgrade to rear diffuser, which basically meant nothing. They still had the worst car on the grid. In theory they should be way behind everybody else, but as we'll see later, they still did pretty well for a very underdeveloped car. Surprised all of us, really, because they've had since the start of the season to upgrade, and they've done hardly anything. So I'm really intrigued to see where that goes. Valiant as well brought along a 20% power upgrade, sort of around, I think it was 10 to 15 brake horsepower. So that's just a little boost to sort of offset them from everybody else. But I think it's round 4 where we're going to see sort of this next big step of upgrades.
So obviously, with that in mind, we had a few upgrades from a few teams, Kacper, but more importantly as well, we had some driver changes because it's getting to the stage in the season where we're already playing our first round of musical chairs in GPVWC.
Yeah, we did have a few driver changes. Daniel Benefield is out after a good while in Super League, and it's a bit, I don't know, I find it a bit sad to see him go, but sure, that's how it is. And Muscat at the moment is going to be covering as a reserve with Jeffrey Fournier in for next 2 races as an emergency. But as far as we can, as far as we can tell from the inside source of Thomas Hinds. So we'll see how that goes anyway. And actually, it would be a pretty good experience for Jeffrey Fournier if he does. For him to get 2 races in Super League, to be honest. And we have Ben Horrell out, who, when it covers at the moment. So we have Francic back in. So is that right?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, Ben? Because that now means that we've got Mlinek, who was substituting for Francic, is now Francic's teammate. I mean, this already seems to be quite an interesting state of affairs at this squad.
Yeah, it's all up in the air a bit at the moment. No word on whether Milnek will be a permanent replacement. As far as I can see, contract-wise, it's still reserve. Francic obviously missed the first 2 races. He comes back in and is a primary driver, so he takes over his car again from Milnek. Milnek's now got the keys to Ben Horrell's car. No massive word on why Horrell's decided to step down. He didn't have the best start to the season. Maybe he just wants to take some time out and maybe have another shot next year. But yeah, it's not the best start for Street Fighter. It's all a bit up in the air at the moment, really.
It is a little bit. But Kacper, there seems to be some movement elsewhere as well, because Matt Beavis has had to sit out, and somebody is covering at the moment. I mean, who is this chancer that's come in to replace Matt Beavis? Who is this guy?
I don't know. I don't think I've ever heard this guy, Ben Willis, you know?
No, Ben, seriously. I mean, what was it like jumping in at the last minute for Shanghai? That must have been quite interesting.
Scary. Very scary.
Given the...
Yeah, I mean, it's annoying, really, because all the way up to the race was, great weather, and then as we'll see in a minute, it didn't quite pan out that way. So all the running I did have was a bit wasted. I mean, it was a great experience, and I'd be grateful if I could do that again. We'll see. I don't really know what the driver situation is at the moment, but yeah, it was good fun at the end of the day, and who knows, maybe I'll get some more.
Awesome. Well, there's always a seat going at Downforce Racing in Formula Challenge if you want that. It's always there. See,
Who knows?
this is literally, this show has turned into my transfer market window for anybody who wants to come and race the downforce car. That is basically what this show's become. Anyway, let's get back on topic. Oskari Kantanen at Adonis was not at Shanghai either, Kacper, and in stepped Dennis Jordan. Now that's an interesting one. Why do we think that might be?
Well, as far as I can recall, Kantanen didn't exactly have a great start to the season, so maybe they're trying to try out Dennis Jordan. Maybe Kantanen just not deciding to, or deciding that maybe he's just not quite feeling the cars, or maybe not feeling what's happening, or maybe he just needs a break or just couldn't make it. I'm not entirely sure. All of it could be true, but I would assume that considering his poor initial attempts at the first two races, I think it's just purely based on trying to get Adonis to get back up there, because they're just nowhere this season.
Okay, so let's go into the race itself. In terms of tyre choice, it was pretty much a 50-50 split, or well, almost a 50-50 split in the end, Ben, because we had Adonis, Storm, Wouters, Hawkeye, and Kerno going down the super soft medium route. And then pretty much everybody else went for the ultra soft, super soft, except for GSR. They had their own idea.
Yeah, it was. It was all set up tyre-wise to be a very interesting race. I think what we've seen over the first two is that even though the softest compounds really struggle with degradation, they're so much faster that it just pays to stop more. I mean, Adonis seemed to be set on this route of taking the harder compounds, the super soft medium, and some teams, to their credit, did follow them. You know, China is a higher degradation track compared to Melbourne and Sochi, so from some angles it made sense to go that way. GSR went down their own route, really. Took the ultra soft as a qualifying tyre and then took soft and medium more for a race strategy. And yeah, it was set to be a really interesting race from a tyre strategy point of view, until it rained.
And then it rained, yeah.
Yeah. Then someone decided to open the heavens and put paid to any kind of tyre strategy from that sense. But it was, you know, don't get me wrong, it was an extremely intriguing race because of the rain, and caught everybody out, I feel.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think what happened was something in the heavens basically opened the tap and then accidentally broke it at the most open position for the entirety of the race.
Yeah, I have a feeling somebody upstairs left the shower on. That wasn't great. So we obviously ended up, well, I'm hoping we get that kind of a split tyre strategy for the next race if it's going to be in the dry at Valencia, because then we might have, you know, a really dynamic tyre strategy race come into play. So I'm looking forward to that. That hopefully that, you know, that is going to be the sign of things to come. We talk now about qualifying, because going into it, Kacper, it kind of ended up looking as if it was going to be another same-o, because we had yet another Vodbull front row lockout.
Yeah, it was very close again in many ways, but yeah, Vodbull just seems to have that pace, especially in qualifying, as we've seen throughout the season. Just being able to be up there. I'm not sure if they maybe have found some way to set the cars up, or if the drivers are just so great, or if at least in qualifying trim, or what's exactly up with everyone else. But we're definitely seeing some dominance from the Vodbull guys.
And it was interesting as well, because this time around, Ben, we had quite a few people who were snapping at their heels, and even the gap in qualifying was much more reduced than we'd seen in the previous two races.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's worth remembering again, though, this was a wet session, and probably in terms of strategy, the tougher one than the race, because to start off the session, the dry line was actually quite dry, and we saw a few drivers try the intermediate tyre, which tends not to be a decent tyre. It was worth a try, and some people did put it to good effect, but towards the end of the session, as the rain kept coming down, nobody was improving. It just got too wet, even on the extreme wet. So that may have been a reason as to why it was relatively close. It was more sort of a you've got a couple of laps to make it count, really. But Vodbull just seemed to have that car dialed in so well, even in the rain. Yeah. Hawkeye there as well, P7, P8 lockout, that was pretty good. Adonis, bit of a way off, Lopez P10. And again, it's been a running theme to the start of the season. Adonis just haven't had the pace that they had, you know, throughout last year. So interested to see how that develops really. But yeah, it was definitely an interesting qualifying session.
Yeah, I really enjoyed actually getting to watch the qualifying session, which I don't normally get to do. I'm usually there just as qualifying ends, unfortunately. But no, it was fascinating, and it was really, really great to see, just how hard people were trying to push in those conditions. Right, race start, and it became apparent very quickly, by about lap 6, actually, when we had our first Vodball pit stop, that it was quite apparent, Kacper, that the tyres in extreme wets were not going to last long. Were you surprised by just how much tyre day we were getting?
Heavily so, because honestly, as far as I usually see, at least in real life, usually wet tires can last pretty much forever as long as the conditions are fine. So it's interesting to see something like this happening, and I definitely wouldn't complain about what it did to the race, because as we'll talk later, it made the difference. Uh, but yeah, I think it was interesting, but very, very odd in the end, and I think it may need to be looked at.
So, in the early stages, we had a fascinating struggle. We wanted to see if the two Vodball drivers could get away, and it was quite clear once we had, the first circulation that it wasn't going to be so, because there was an early challenge from Gergo Baldi. Now, Ben, was this race always destined to be the race where Gergo Baldi came into his own, or do we think that Vodball might have dropped the ball this time?
It's a tough one to call, really. I mean, the rain put paid to any kind of pre-planned strategy. It was all basically, can you decide it on the fly? And if you look at the numbers, the Vodball should be faster any day of the week. The Wouters is the second worst car out there. There's Gergo's a brilliant driver, but purely looking at the numbers, he shouldn't have been up there. And I think it's brilliant to see that he was. The problem with these tyres were, I think from a spectacle point of view, it was brilliant seeing the number of pit stops, different strategies, working out can drivers get them to last the 8 laps to sort of set themselves up. Some people had to come in early. You'll see Vodball came in, I think it was lap 6, as you said, for that first stop. From a driver point of view, it was infuriating. These tyres were going off after 2-3 laps. There was just no front grip at all. We couldn't drive them past 50% wear, because that was like the cliff. There was just no front grip after that. You could say it came a bit monotonous for the drivers. But from a spectacle point of view, it was brilliant. I don't know if Wouters were banking on a wet race. If they were, then they got the strategy and the setup dead right. But it's tough to say if Vodball did let the ball slip. A second and third is still brilliant in the conditions, and to get to the end in the conditions is brilliant. So tough to say.
Yeah, yeah, I'll add to it. And again, I think it made for a brilliant show. As you said, it played a big role. But then again, is having more pit stops in the wet than in the dry, is that really what we're looking at? Although it did show something very interesting, I think, that the Vodball cars, as we've seen a bit before as well on the strategy, especially from Rudy, they seem to be using the tires quite a bit more.
I think that was something we noticed in Australia as well, when we saw Rudy and Risto coming a lot earlier. Maybe that's how they're getting that front grip and just putting the cars so fast.
Well, it's interesting because Risto, he pitted on lap 6, so he actually couldn't make the tyres last as long as Rudy by 2 laps. Now, Kacper, is that inexperience, or do they just have completely different driving styles?
It could also possibly be that Rudy had, he started from the front, from the first place, and maybe he just could make the tires last a bit longer because he had clean air and less sliding, less maybe lockups or something along these lines.
I think it's worth noting the dirty air in these cars is pretty huge. Obviously, 2017 spec regulations is really hard to follow. So if Risto was in traffic, sat behind Rudy and Gergo, he is going to scrub those front tyres longer, and we saw that by Risto making an extra stop. So
no, fair enough. Despite how wet it was out there, we didn't actually see too many mad moments, I have to say, which was quite incredible when you consider, it was so easy for drivers to lose it or to lose their heads or whatever. I think maybe the only person from the race that really kind of got into the wars was, well, not necessarily a surprise, but it's difficult for them again to be in that situation, Ben, and that was Fran Lopez, who kind of had one too many moments again for the third race running.
Yeah, Fran Lopez is a curious case because on one day he can be the fastest driver out there by a mile. I look back to Kota last year, and he just had the Red Archer hooked up. He was putting in fastest laps, leading from the front, looked sublime. Come this season, he's looked a little off, just hasn't quite got used to the car yet. A lot of drivers have been complaining about the tyres and how sensitive they are to heat and not being able to push lap upon lap, which maybe that's Fran's driving style doesn't suit that. Some drivers it does, and they're making it work. So it's tough, and I'd love to see him do better. I'd love to see Adonis doing better as well. They just haven't had the rub of the green to the start of this season, I feel.
Yeah, and I'll quickly just add to it that we may not have seen too many actual moments and crashes except for Fran, but we have definitely seen that it was not easy to drive, especially if we looked at any of the onboards from Garrigo. He may have been so quick, but you could see him struggling with the car everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
You were driving sideways. You were trying to basically keep it in a straight line on a straight. It was absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it was really tough. And I say there weren't too many mad incidents, but nobody's going to argue that David Fiduk had probably the maddest incident of the whole race, in the fact that because of the way that he approached the hairpin in the battle, he was upside down for a brief few seconds and managed, how on earth his car managed to survive is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, that was just pure luck, I suppose, really, more than anything else, wasn't it?
They build those Norwegians tough, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no denying it. Driving in those conditions was extremely tough, and that's why, these drivers are here. They are the best out of everybody here, and a lot of them showed that. I think it was natural there was going to be some spins. I can remember myself having a very scary moment towards a very big tyre barrier, very, very much saved by gravel. But it was tough out there, and it really tested the drivers, and I think that's what we like to see in Super League. We got a great race out of it.
That's very true. Now, one of the big talking points as a result of Shanghai, of course, was that it was very tricky conditions, and there were some drivers who dropped out. A lot of them dropped out this time. We only had 16 finishers. I'm not going to look in your direction, Ben. I know there's probably circumstances. But we'll move on and talk about Woods in particular, because they actually had a double DNF as the squad. Now, let's not forget the fact they're both on fresh engines. Now, we know, obviously, for this year that each car has 6 engines over the course of the season. We've got 18 races to do, and the average wear in every race, of course, is anywhere between... Well, it's just a push over 30% to maybe somewhere around the sort of 36, 37%. So it's not exactly, they're kind of dancing with it. What's that line from Remember the Titans and Will Patton? There's a fine line between tough and crazy, and you're flirting with it. It is very, very difficult to know exactly how they're going to get, the strategy to work over the course of the year with these 6 engines per car. So Thomas Jacobs asks, what do we think of drivers retiring the car to save the engine? And is it becoming a legitimate strategy call? Kacper, do you think that's what we saw in Shanghai?
I wouldn't deny that could have been it. I wouldn't say some of the retirements definitely seemed like they could have been it, and if they were, I'll be honest. I absolutely have a distaste for this kind of a strategy call, but I think with the wear of these engines, it's very legitimate.
So yeah, I mean, it's a good point you raised there, Kacper. I mean, Ben, obviously Kacper's saying this is not the greatest strategic move in terms of the purity of it. Do you understand from a point of view of a team why they do it, or should they not do it? Should this be more about the sporting aspect?
So during the race, actually, I was chatting to the Woods guys, also being part of the Trinity group, and that was the call. At the end of the day, they both retired because from where they were standing, they couldn't score points, and they felt it best to save the engine and recoup that where later on. I think it is actually going to be something we're going to see recurringly throughout the season, because if we're losing about 30 to 36 extreme per race, and we have 18 races, 6 engines, by notion, every third race on an engine is going to be tough.
Right.
And I think the Woods guys here have clearly thought ahead of the game with a fresh engine. They now know they can get 2 races out of it where they can push like crazy on it. They sacrificed any chance of scoring points in China. I think they both knew they weren't going to, so that's why they parked the car. And as much as I agree with Kacper, I don't think it's right, but it's the situation we're in. At the end of the day, we have 6 engines to play with. We've got 18 races. We've got to make them last. Nobody wants to pay I think it's £1 million penalty for a new engine. So, that's a lot of dev money for teams.
Yeah. As I said, it's a legitimate strategy. I just have an absolute distaste for this actually becoming a strategy.
It's a shame it has to be that way, but that's the hand teams have been dealt with, and that's how you react to it. You've got to. End of the day, teams are always trying to look for ways around, the poor cards dealt to them. Yeah.
It's worth talking about this again to a certain extent, because let's point out as well that obviously in Shanghai we had torrential rain, so obviously the cars were not pushing themselves to the top speeds they could have done, and obviously drivers are trying to gain better traction, so are using lower boost. Now that means of course that worn engines are not actually going to have as much of a negative effect. So is that a bad call, do we think, perhaps by the teams who took a fresh engine? They could have really wasted that, I suppose, technically speaking. I mean, what do you think on that, Kacper? I mean, if we had obviously a wet race, a lot of the engines have already done, 2/3 of the distance. For those that have taken a new engine, is that a major strategy blow?
I think it is a strategy blow, but they obviously can't know that the weather is going to be like this before the race. So, yeah, you wouldn't risk betting on a wet race anyway. And I think that, well, as much as it is a disadvantage for anybody that took a fresh engine, well, there was nothing else they could have really done, because otherwise it would have not been competitive. But I think I'm seeing the pattern that a lot of the teams prefer to have the better engine at the beginning of the season as well.
I think to jump in on that, it's a tough call because China needs a lot of power. We've got a massive 1 kilometer straight, so you want to take that fresh engine, get as much power as you can. It is one of our power tracks, but equally, they've had to detune them for the rain. You've lost a little bit of the performance gain. Although it is worth noting, actually, on the flip side, given the lack of traction, those engines would have been revving higher if the wheels are spinning.
Yeah.
And then you're wearing them again. If you delve into the engine files, you find out towards the higher end of the rev range, you start to get a little bit more wear. So maybe by spinning up those wheels, you're going to waste the engine a bit. But it was tough. I mean, it's always tough with the weather. No one knows what it's going to be until the day. So yeah, it's always tough.
Well, what I want to put to you then is, the argument that teams are going to have is that, okay, we took a fresh engine and we parked the car because we knew we weren't going to get the points. Now, a lot of people are going to say that's not a particularly great strategy for us in terms of, the show. But let me put it to you this way. Let's say we get to, Monza, for example, end of August. And obviously that engine has a little bit more power in reserve than it perhaps would have done if they'd have done the full distance at Shanghai. You can now bring that engine out and push it perhaps a little bit harder than other teams might be able to, or they might have to be forced to go onto a fresher engine. This could actually end up being, Kacper, a sort of a short-term loss, long-term game if they'd done that.
Could be, and I think we're still early on in the season. This is the 3rd race, so honestly, in the end, I think personally, if I was a team manager, I would also pick a new engine for this track again. It is because it is one of the power tracks. I think this Spa and Monza are the tracks that you need new engines on, and that's as you said, Monza is later on. You kind of want a fresh engine for that, but so we do here because, again, as Ben pointed out, it's a power track, and that's it. Yeah.
Fair enough. Right, so that was an interesting part of it. One guy we need to make a mention of here, just outside the podium, was Lee Morris, who, yet again, Ben, what that guy is doing with this car at the moment is just phenomenal, given the circumstances he's in. He is absolutely on it at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, he's in the worst car there, and he's finished P4, which is, it's just insane, really. It's a great drive from Lee. I mean, as I keep saying every week, we know he's fast. He's proven that time and time again. But the fact he's continuing to do it in what is arguably the worst chassis out there is pretty remarkable. I mean, they do have, in theory, the best engine to counteract that. The Valiant is up on power, but still, great drive to P4. I don't think you can argue with that. I think if Mad Cape now start bringing the upgrades, he could be a serious title contender, I feel.
I definitely agree.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how that goes. The other big name, obviously, we need to talk about, Kacper, is the Nordsian squad. And obviously, we've seen how well they did in Australia, with David. He had a great comeback there in terms of strategy. At Sochi, they were, pretty good as well. But here at Shanghai, it was almost as if they were on the back foot. And both drivers, both Florian and David, it was difficult for them. They kind of ended up being the best of the rest in their own little race just outside the top 5.
Very, and I think something that I was thinking of before the season that David especially, he was very, very good with the previous cars. And these are so different that I think he's just not quite finding himself in it. And probably Florian is the same. They're just not quite finding their tire saving being maybe as useful in a way, and because you need that raw pace. And I think it was a big part here as well. In the wet, it was just purely on the you just needed that pure pace. You didn't need tire saving either. And I think Nordstrom is just having a very disappointing season. And I'll be honest, I don't see David having any chance of defending his title this season.
I'm not so sure about that. I feel he's definitely had a slow start. Don't get me wrong, but these cars at the end of the day, they are so different. As I say, working with Woods guys and GSR, every setup from last year is having to be changed, it's having to be tweaked, because the car is just so different in terms of tyres, in terms of the chassis, the suspension itself. And maybe he's just finding it hard to adapt to that. I mean, we could see in a few races' time he's suddenly back at the front again, and it's never too late to put on a title challenge.
Yeah, it's a good point, Ben. I mean, again, we have to remind ourselves, most of what happened at Shanghai was because of the rain. Most of the teams were caught out by it. I mean, look, Storm, potentially, the best car, and they were absolutely nowhere. That just didn't happen. SRS, they could have been, driving a different race on a different circuit for all the notice we took of them. And, Hawkeye won in Sochi, and they got 10th position in Shanghai. I mean, it was almost as if the form book was completely flipped on its head. Even Adonis were way off compared to where we were used to see them, Kacper. I mean, to a certain degree, that race was a breath of fresh air, but it doesn't really give us much of an indication as to what the championship fight is going to have.
No, but then again, I'm just looking at especially the last couple of races, and yeah, you can definitely say that there's still potential to, to come back. But I'm just looking at David, and I don't see him finding his way quickly enough. But then again, I could be very wrong. He could put up a challenge, but at the moment, it seems like he's going to struggle.
Well, there is one thing that I want to predict going into Valencia, and I'm going to be,
Here we go again.
Yeah, toppling over the edge of my fence. I have a feeling there is going to be a driver change, and I don't know what you think about this from my point of view, or from what you've seen of it. But no, it's not Fran Lopez. Don't look at me like that. No, it's not. He'll still be doing fine. The man I do want to have a look at, though, is Michel de Jong, because Australia, non-finish. Sochi, non-finish again. Shanghai, that ultimately could have been his best chance of a decent points finish. And again, he fails to finish. Now, guys, there's only so many times, you've been in this situation before. Surely there's only so many races you can fail to finish before the team boss gets irritated and wants to put in a fresh pair of boots.
I mean, speaking as a team manager myself, I would be asking a few questions, I feel. A couple of DNFs you can accept. People have bad races, people get caught out. End of the day, that's racing, isn't it? 3 DNFs on a row. It's starting to ask questions. The one benefit is he's still on the first engine he used from Australia, and it's only 93%. It's probably about 91 now. So engine wear, he's doing really well.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. Yes, you're right. You're right. He's done okay on the engine wear front.
In terms of points, not so good. And
that's a difficult one.
he showed pretty good pace in Formula Challenge last year. I don't know if he's maybe been caught out by the double jump Cape took that straight up to SL. I don't know, but I would agree with you, Jake. I think if this continues, I think Madcape would definitely need to start looking for a new driver.
It's difficult, and obviously that is a massive jump to go from Formula Challenge to Super League. Perhaps I know he wants obviously to stick around with the same team, but maybe, just maybe, you feel that perhaps a campaign in Super Cup first might have been a little bit of an easier jump to make. I don't know. Right, we have a Twitter now. Ooh, get us being all, get us being all social and media-ish. Yes, we have a Twitter feed, which is @SLShowSN. So any questions you have for this show in the future, do please tweet us and use the hashtag SLShow so that we can pick them up. David Fidek, young whippersnapper that he is, he's asked us a question. He's asked us, with Vodbull and Nordsjön and a few other teams going with the Ultrasoft Supersoft Soft option for China, do we think the medium and hard tyres will be used this season? Now, this is a good question, Kacper, because I'm looking through the schedule. And obviously, we don't have any races. We don't have Bahrain this year, which I suppose probably would have been the most likely circuit to have used them for the first time. But I'm looking through the calendar and looking at the fact, he makes a good point here, because Shanghai, I almost would have thought the medium would be used. And I'm looking through, there's probably only one track, and that's Mexico City, right at the end of the year. And I'm not even sure, looking at how the tyres are working at the moment, if the teams get an advantage going, soft as the hardest option, they might not even be used in Mexico.
Well, we have seen people take up mediums for to try them out, and or to have them in their for the race, and they've not seemed to be working, at least in Sochi, if I recall correctly. Adonis tried them or softs. I can't recall it anymore, but they just didn't work. And well, mediums we'll definitely see in the lineup, I personally think. But hards, I have stated 2 weeks ago that they will not be used this season. I keep by the statement, especially now that seeing what has been chosen for China.
Like last week, I want to counter that purely because if there's any place the hard tyres are going to come out, it'll be Britain and America. They're the two highest deg tracks we've got coming up. You think Britain, sweeping corners, Maggots, Beckett's, Abbey, loads of tyre load, Cops as well. Same with Sector 1 at America. It's exactly the same deal. With the tyres in their current state, it's tough.
It's a good
then again, you have so much more grip with these that you will start sliding with the mediums and start wearing them down pretty quickly as well. And ultra softs, as we've seen, they're so much quicker, especially through corners. And again, sweepers, especially, that they may gain a second to just through the Maggots and Beckett's, and just well, what are you going to do about that? Then you're going to have a free pit stop.
Exactly. So maybe it is a better idea to take those softer tyres. Okay, they only last for 5-6 laps, but the time you gain on them offsets the extra pit stop. Who knows?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. While we're on the subject of tyres, actually, we talked last time about whether the tyres need adjusting, perhaps. Are they too thermally sensitive? And Thomas Hines actually asks a question. He says, does the panel think that the high number of stops seen per race so far this season puts on a good show for Super League, while at the same time being as enjoyable for the drivers themselves? Now, I'm going to ask you this, Ben, as a driver in the Super League at Shanghai last year, that was the first time really you got to see, the tyre degradation of that high extreme. From your point of view, does Tom have a point here? Is this a good show for Super League?
It's tough. I think at the moment we're slightly erring on the side of too many pit stops. I think it's great from a well, is it great from a strategy point of view? Because everybody's just picking ultra softs and super softs. That's the thing. Thinking about it now, yes, we've got loads of pit stops, and it meaning strategies are all over the place, but it's the same two tyres at the end of the day. And thinking about it on reflection, I think the tyres do need adjusting. I think the hards need a bit more grip, the mediums need a bit more grip and a bit more durability, and the soft as well just needs a bit more life in it, really.
Well, here's a suggestion, Kacper. I put it to you. I mean, if everybody is just going to go down this route, do we need to be allocating at which circuits? How many circuits over the course of a year you can use that particular type of tyre, and you just kind of have to work with what tyres you're given over the course of the season. I mean, would that make it a little bit more even, perhaps, or would it make it a little bit more pure in terms of which circuits you actually decide to go ultra soft, super soft? I mean, would that settle it, or is it a bit more complicated than that?
While I think that would be an absolutely fascinating move, and the strategy battle would be very interesting. I think it wouldn't be great. First of all, I don't think it would be great for a show to have teams deliberately giving up on a race to just throw out the tires, because that would happen. That would definitely happen for them to get an advantage on other races. So that I don't think that's the solution. I think Ben is definitely right. I think we're having too many pit stops, and I have thought that from the beginning. To be honest, 5-6 pit stops is just too much. 7 this race, 8 for one of the drivers, as I see. But I don't think this is viable, really. And I think honestly, what we're gonna have, what I see as a perfect kind of pitting amount. Is at most 4 stops in a race for the more aggressive drivers. And I think, as Ben said, the tires need adjusting, and I think they would need to be heavily tested before being put into place, so we would avoid the situation we're in now. But I think at the moment the tires are just not quite right.
I think to jump on that point, actually, a system like, I think you're referring to there, Jake, a bit like British touring cars, I guess.
Yeah,
with
very
the
similar.
turret, okay. Yeah, whilst I think in theory that would be a brilliant suggestion, and I would like to see that tested, to be honest. I agree with Kacper that some teams will take advantage of that and waste a tyre set somewhere where they know they're not going to do well, just so they can use a softer compound somewhere else. I think balancing the tyre such that the hard tyre becomes a valid one-stop solution or two-stop solution is the good way to go, where we can get to a point where teams are mixing strategies. I don't think we're going to see that unless something changes.
It is all an interesting point, and I'm not sure what the real answer is, but I have a feeling that is a discussion that, I mean, I suppose it depends on the next couple of rounds of the championship as to how far that discussion goes and, what the right or wrong answers are. Okay, so, no questioning how cool it was to see Gergo Baldi and Rudy Van Buren go head-to-head on the strategy, and that finish was a nail-biter to see, who managed to get the tyres right and who managed to get them wrong, and a very worthy victory for Gergo in very difficult circumstances. So, bests and worsts. Okay, who was the best driver of Shanghai? Kacper Kolodicic, who would you say was the best?
I think our race winner, Gergo Baldi. I'll be honest, that push and that the speed he has had for as long as he has had on these tires every single time, and the one up he did on Rudy, I think is well deserving of the driver of the day.
Okay, Ben, can you argue with that?
Yes, and I'm going to stick with my praise for Lee Morris, purely because to achieve P4 in the worst car, pretty much, is a really good feat. So Lee Morris for me. Gergo did a great job, don't get me wrong. Vodball's obviously out there as well. But yeah, Lee Morris for me.
I'm going to go with the same answer as you, Ben, for exactly the same reason. I mean, we kind of expected the Vodballs to be there at the front. They did do a good job. Risto, again, he's inexperienced. He's not quite there on the same level as Rudy Van Buren, but he did okay considering, this is still, his first big test of this kind. And Gergo, well, he was fantastic. That was a great strategy from them, and it was the solidarity and the consistency of that car worked very well. But yeah, I mean, that car is a howler that Lee Morris has got. It's absolutely appalling, and he's making it look so glorious. He's basically taking a rat and making it look like a hamster. It's absolutely brilliant at the moment. It's brilliant. That's the best, that's the best analogy I can think of in that one.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely brilliant. Right, best team. Who made the best use of Shanghai for your money, Ben? Who do you think was the best out of that?
It's hard to look past Vodball, isn't it? 2-3. Okay, they didn't win like they have the last. Well, they did in Australia and came oh so close in Sochi. And I think Mike Pittman admitted to us that it was a slight bit of an error in strategy call as to why they didn't win there. And we saw that towards the end. Maybe Van Buren stayed out just a tad too long. But yeah, Vodball 2-3 is brilliant. Still leading the constructors. They're doing really well. So Vodball for me.
Okay, is there any argument there at all, Kacper?
Not even in the slightest. I don't think there is any valid argument you can put against that.
No, I think I'd say exactly the same. Yeah, Vodball got the strategy right. Other than the victory, they made the best use of the car. Other than Gergo Baldi, they just disappeared out in front of the rest of the field. And again, they are still the team to beat. Right, the lowest point, worst driver. Kacper, there's a couple of contenders for this one, but who would you put?
Fran for that return on track. Yeah, I'm sorry, but that was an absolutely atrocious move.
Any arguments there, Ben?
I mean, from obviously that's for the disciplinary guys to sort out, not for me to judge on. I agree, Kacper, that obviously rejoins like that are not cool. I think putting that aside from a performance point of view, we have to look at Mitchell de Jong for the DNF third time in a row.
That too, yeah.
Obviously, that needs to improve pretty sharpishly for Mad Cape. But as you say, Lopez's move wasn't the best. I'm sure the DC will look at that and rule on it accordingly.
Yeah, I think it's got to be one or the other, possibly both. For that one, I think, for various different reasons. I'm going to put a quick vote in there for surprise of the race, a pleasant surprise of the race, because there was one guy in particular who I feel does need a bit of a big up, and that is Adrian McNaughton. I felt he was actually really, really strong at various points in the race. Okay, yes, he didn't stay in the top 10, but, he had some high pressure over the course of the race at various points, and he actually handled himself very well, considering, Australia wasn't great, Sochi wasn't great. Here in Shanghai, he actually seemed to enjoy himself out there a bit more. So he was getting into some juicy little battles, and I was pleasantly surprised to see how well he did.
I'm going to very quickly counter that actually. Whilst he did show some, surprisingly good pace at points, there was that moment with him and Redshaw into turn 1 that I know Lewis was not pleased about. I think McNaughton lost it into turn 1 and was sort of halfway across the track and then started moving as Redshaw came round.
Yes, I'd forgotten about that bit.
It's a bit of a stain on his record, but putting that aside, and as I say, the DC will look at that. That's obviously not our job to speculate on who should get what.
Other than the moment when he took out another racing driver. Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
Your point still stands, though. Yeah, he did show some really good driving.
Well, the positivity is what I want to see from him moving over to Valencia. And of course, that is the next round of the championship on the streets of Valencia in Spain for the 4th round of the championship. Lots of upgrades are coming, of course, from various different teams. First question on this one, before we close, really. The first talking point about Valencia, Kacper. We're hoping that there's going to be low tyre degradation. So will we see less pit stops?
I think we're still going to see at least 4 pit stops from everybody. No matter how low this track or any track will be this season, I think we're going to see a lot of pit stops unless the tires change. Just because everyone will just drive the ultra softs.
Sorry, just the idea of more pit stops.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that one, Ben? Do you reckon?
I mean, whilst I agree that we'll see a similar number of pit stops, from what I'm finding, I've been driving the track in case I need to jump in the GSR again. It's a lovely track, and I can't wait to see the racing there. I think it's just a brilliant street track. I've always loved it. It's very much a love-hate track. Some people actually hate it and hate the idea of this wide street track. I really like it. But what I'm finding is the super softs are just a little bit nicer than the ultra softs in terms of not overheating and getting a few more laps out of them. I think we could see the super soft being a very strong race tyre, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a few try and qualify on it again.
Okay.
Oh, very interesting.
Just a bold prediction.
Yeah, no,
interesting.
We like bold predictions. That's what gets people talking. We like that. Okay, so I know we've overshot a little bit by 40 minutes or so.
We're not doing too bad, to be fair. Not doing too bad.
I tell you what, if Mike Pittman wants to come and have a swipe at anybody, well, Mike, here are my kneecaps. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. Come on. So, obviously, we've got some more great shows coming up for you from SimRace.TV. There's loads of great stuff coming from SimNews.TV. 19th of April, 10 o'clock, it's the Scrutineer, of course, back for more. 24th of April, back at 8 o'clock again, it is Parker's Pit Stop. Make sure you tune in for that one. We are back after the Valencian Grand Prix, which is going to be the day before I turn 30. 26th of April. 26th of April. Yes, 26th of April at 8 p.m. So that is all going to be fine and dandy. We'll make sure we're back for that. Of course, we've got our own Twitter feed, as we mentioned before. So make sure, if you do nothing else following listening to this, then please, of course, make sure that you are you're now part of the Twitter feed, which, as we mentioned before, Ben, remind me, the Twitter feed?
At SLShowSN, and tweet us either directly or with the hashtag SLShow. I'll be there making sure they all get fed into our notes.
There you go. So that's one Twitter feed. If you want to add another one, then do please add at Downforce Radio, because, of course, moving forward, we have Downforce Radio commentary very much as part of GPVWC, with Dan Blake coming in to sort out the Formula Challenge and Super Cup nights. And he's going to have a barrel of laughs doing that for the rest of the season. Myself and Josh Anderson will, of course, be back with the rest of the GPVWC team, with the likes of Argo on cams and Mike Pittman and everybody doing their hard work behind the scenes. And, of course, my colleagues here, Ben Willis and Kacper, keeping an eye on everything so that we can have another great Super League show on the 26th of April. Thank you again, gentlemen.
No worries. Thank you.
It was lovely, as always.
So, the big question, can Vodbull be beaten in the dry? Well, the Spanish Grand Prix at Valencia might be the first chance we get to answer that question. But what will Cooper do? What will Morris do? What will Baldi do? And also, what can Nordsian bring to the party? All of those questions will probably be answered on the 26th of April at 8 p.m. for the next edition of the Super League show. I'm Jake Stanton. This is SimNews.TV. Goodbye for now.